now we're going to bring you some more analysis ahead of today's meeting. We want to bring in Alex Kliment. He is a senior editor at GZERO Media. Alex, thank you so much for joining us right now. So you've been writing a lot, actually, about this upcoming meeting on the GZERO Media website. And your last post, the final line is, stable and predictable. Well, the relationship already is. It's stably and predictably bad. So what can we expect from today's meeting? What are the chances that we can improve on the current status of stably and predictably bad?
Well, we're starting from an extremely low bar. So I think in a certain sense, nothing dramatic happening would be considered a great success at this meeting. U.S.-Russian relations are at their worst point, at least since the end of the Cold War, and probably before that. I mean, if you go back to the mid-'80s, Reagan and Gorbachev, that relationship was arguably better than what we have now, Ivan Drago notwithstanding. Today, U.S. has imposed dozens of economic sanctions on Russia over issues ranging from Russia's election interference to human rights abuses in Russia, Russia's continuing illegal occupation of Crimea and support for separatists in eastern Ukraine, and cyber attacks on American companies. From the U.S. perspective, Russia is a revisionist menace, right? That's how the U.S. sees Russia. The Russians, for their part, to be fair, see the United States as a kind of arrogant colossus that goes around the world starting endless wars and treats Russia like a second-class citizen, even in its own neighborhood. That's the Russian view. Those two points of view are not going to be reconciled at one meeting in Geneva, certainly. But that's not the point of this meeting. The point of this meeting, as Ian said, is to really establish a baseline. Both sides are looking to see, is there a way, even given this tremendously antagonistic relationship, is there a way to make that relationship, at the minimum, a little bit more stable and a little bit more predictable?
Yeah, I think it was, you mentioned Ronald Reagan. I think he was the president who said in regards to the relationship between the U.S. and Russia, trust but verify. And President Biden said the other day, verify first, and then we can move on to trust. What will be the biggest challenges of today's meeting?
Well, I think both sides are going to get in their darts and their grievances with the other about the things I just mentioned. I think the important bits will be two things. One, when each side lays out its red lines for the other, right? I think Putin is quite likely to tell Biden, look, you better not try to expand NATO any further eastward or there'll be hell to pay, right? That's one of Putin's red lines. Biden is likely to make a big deal about election interference. He may make some comment about the treatment of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. But this will be an exchange of red lines, which is important. Even in a bad relationship, you want to understand what your adversary's red lines are so you don't miscalculate. So that's one thing. The second thing, I think, and it's really important, is they will be looking for areas where they can cooperate. One huge area is nuclear arms control. These are the two largest nuclear arsenals in the world. Neither of them wants an uncontrolled arms race. And actually, I think, interestingly, both of them want to explore ways to manage the challenge of the rapidly growing nuclear arsenal in China. So nuclear arms is one really big area, and we've already seen progress between Moscow and Washington on that. Another area is the Iran nuclear deal, where, again, Russian and American negotiators have been working together really well over the past few weeks to help reconstruct the deal that, of course, President Trump walked out of in 2018. So the areas for cooperation are small, but they are not unimportant. And I think it will be a good sign if coming out of this meeting, both sides commit to work further on those.
What about this business of a possible prisoner swap? Is that something that could happen?
It certainly could, and it would be good if it did. It's the kind of thing that if you're looking to build a little bit more trust in an otherwise bad relationship, that's precisely the kind of thing that both sides could do. It costs both sides almost nothing to do that. That would be a good sign as well.
The thing about Vladimir Putin is, when we talk about, kind of getting some sort of predictable, stable relationship, is that, instability is kind of like one of his tactics, though. He sort of benefits from a certain degree of global instability, which kind of brings me to these naval exercises that are happening in the Pacific. You can't ignore the timing. They're massive naval exercises. What are we to make of that decision to go ahead with those?
Well, I think they certainly send a signal, say, hey, I'm here. We as Russia are here, and you can't ignore that. I think the thing to bear in mind, though, is, look, Russia's not doing anything illegal, right? I mean, Russia has just as much right to the international waters as the Americans do. It's the kind of thing, though, where if you're dealing with massive military operations just a few hundred miles off the coast of each other's countries, where you want to have, at the very least, a functional and transparent relationship. Again, doesn't have to be a good relationship, but a functional and transparent one, so that the lines of communication are open and you don't get miscalculations that can escalate very quickly.
Mm-hmm. So, we've been told to sort of downgrade our expectations when it comes to this meeting. So I get it. There's no one's going to be signing any agreements or anything. But, you point out that at the very least, both sides will be able to sort of map out their boundaries, their red lines. So at least the understanding is that the world doesn't have to sort of sit on pins and needles and wonder if one side is going to go too far. But how do we know? How do we ensure that, either side upholds any agreement that they sort of come to during this meeting? Or is that not even a valid question, that this is just sort of the opening, this is the appetizer, and the best that we can hope is that they will move on to the main course at some point?
I think that's a really nice way of putting it. That this is sort of the appetizer before the main course. This is the baseline. We will see how things progress from here. Again, it's an absolutely terrible relationship, and any improvement or any stability or any lack of drama, I think, would be considered a big improvement. I think one interesting thing for Biden, though, is that the difficulty of his Russia policy actually begins when he leaves Geneva. In other words, when he gets back to Washington, because he's going to be under tremendous pressure, bipartisan pressure, to be tougher on Russia. Obviously, the Democrats have a very low opinion of Russia, at least since 2016. But Republicans as well are really pushing hard, saying, hey, you knocked our guy for 4 years about how he was so soft on Russia. Why isn't Sleepy Joe doing more, right? So he's going to be under a lot of pressure to be tougher on Russia in ways that may go beyond what he's... You have to remember, Biden is not interested in focusing a whole lot on Russia. His main priorities are China. He wants to focus on climate change. He wants to focus on the pandemic. He wants to focus on infrastructure. So I think what Biden really wants is, out of this meeting, at the very least, is to get Russia to stay quiet enough that it doesn't become a huge distraction for his presidency when he really wants to focus on other things. And the second he gets back to Washington, I think, Russia's quite a political football in D.C. these days, as you know, and he's going to have to navigate that very carefully.
Yeah, we're just letting everyone know that what they're looking at are live pictures from Geneva. We see some American flags on the motorcade, so there's a possibility that the American contingent, including the president, is in there. You talked about how Biden's preference, particularly now as we're emerging from a pandemic, is to focus on domestic issues. And I think a little bit at the center of their challenge, these two men, is that, it's a liability for President Biden to have to focus outside of the country when he has so much going on here at home. But for Putin, it's, some observers have said that he benefits from, some sort of instability outside of his country, because for him, having Russians distracted from what's going on within its borders, distracted from the domestic issues there, is a benefit to Putin. And so at that very core, the two men have kind of different agendas.
I think that's true, although I wouldn't, it's not as though meddling in the U.S. election is something that vast numbers of Russians really care about and say, "Hey, this is a great thing. Carry on." The issue in Ukraine obviously hit much closer to home for a lot of Russians. But yeah, I think, look, the thing about Vladimir Putin is that Russia is, in the grand scheme of things, quite a small economy. It's not the superpower that it once was, but Putin is exceptionally good at playing this tactical game where he identifies certain pressure points where the West maybe doesn't have as much skin in the game as Russia does, and exploiting them to enhance Russia's international stature. He's very good at that. And as you say, the examples where he's done that have been ones that have, generated some instability. Although from the Russian perspective, the U.S. is the one that is generating instability in various parts around the world. And that's part of why this relationship is so hard to reconcile, because it's two totally different points of departure.
And of course, these are also two men meeting. They've met before. Biden met Putin as a vice president, but Putin has had the benefit of meeting a number of different presidents. I'm wondering, Alex, if you could give us sort of a wee little history lesson about, Putin and the many other presidents that he's met and how their relationships went.
Well, this is the fifth U.S. president that Putin will have met since he came to power in the end of 1999. With Bush, George W. Bush, you may remember that Bush is the person who said he had looked into Putin's eyes and gotten a sense of his soul. So that was a period where it was right after 9/11. The Russians had been very welcoming about allowing U.S. access to Afghanistan via their airspace. There was a sense in the early 2000s that there might be a real kind of strong U.S.-Russia relationship based on counterterrorism, based on various global interests that they shared. That fell apart pretty quickly. The Russians objected strenuously to the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And as Russia got more powerful because of the oil boom in the early 2000s, Putin really started to feel the kind of freedom to act, as Russia felt that it wanted to, rather than as it had to, in a world run by the U.S. The successive rounds of NATO expansion eastward were perceived by Russia, at least, as a threat. The countries that joined NATO didn't see it as a threat. They saw it as a protection for themselves. So the relationship really started to fall apart. Then Obama came into office and tried to pull off what was called the reset with Russia, where they tried to reset relations and put them on a firmer footing. That lasted a couple of years, but fell apart quite quickly over disagreements over democracy and human rights issues. And then, of course, 2014, the revolution in Ukraine. Then comes Trump. Obviously, we remember well the various facets of the Trump-Russia relationship. What's interesting is that although Trump himself was extremely, almost suspiciously, favorably disposed towards Russia, at the White House level, actual policy towards Russia during the Trump presidency was not particularly soft. I mean, and Congress really stepped in on a lot of things, and there were a number of sanctions imposed on Russia. So while the relationship was pretty soft and sort of almost I don't know. It was that's a very strange relationship. You saw them at Helsinki together, and Trump was saying, "I believe Putin over my own intelligence agencies." At the president level, there was this sort of weird thing going on, but the actual policy towards Russia was actually pretty firm throughout the 4 years of the Trump presidency. Again, largely coming from Congress. And now you have Biden taking his bite at the apple, right? This is the fifth president who's met with Putin. And the expectations here, I think it's important to note, again, are so low, right? This is not a summit that is meant to achieve a massive breakthrough or a massive improvement in U.S.-Russian relations. It's meant at the very minimum, in fact, at the maximum, it's meant to establish a stable footing for what is otherwise a very bad relationship that both sides recognize.
All right, Alex, you've given us a really good snapshot of how we got here and where we've come from. I really appreciate your time. Alex Kliment, thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.